You are now listening to the Palm Pod, brought to you by RSPO, a global partnership to make palm oil sustainable. Hi, I'm Fara Rom, and you're tuning into the Palm Pod, where we host engaging discussions, expert insights, and industry updates on sustainable palm oil, guiding consumers and businesses to make better choices for the planet. In today's episode, we're diving into the world of regenerative agriculture, a farming approach that's gaining momentum as an effective solution to the environmental challenges left in the wake of the Green Revolution. So, talking about the Green Revolution, it has brought a surge in global food production through the introduction of high-yield crop varieties and intensified farming practices. While it significantly improved food security, it also gave rise to new challenges such as soil degradation, land erosion, and reduced biodiversity. Today, regenerative agriculture is emerging as a promising solution to these issues, offering a more balanced approach that restores soil health while maintaining productivity. The UN Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD, estimates that adopting regenerative agriculture on a global scale could significantly cut agricultural greenhouse gas emissions or GHG emissions and restore up to 5 billion hectares of land over the next 3 years. To explore this important topic, we're joined by Reza Azmi and John House from Wild Asia, who are here to share insights into their Wild Asia Group Scheme Bio or WEX Bio project, where this incredible initiative advances the sustainability journey of RSPO Certified independent smallholders by promoting regenerative agriculture practices. Welcome, Reza and John, to the Palm Pod.
Morning, Farah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here. And to begin, could you tell us about your roles in Wild Asia? And we can start with Reza.
Great. Actually, so myself and John were co-founders of Wild Asia. And as founders, we sort of started it from scratch. And so our role is really to guide a lot of the field programs that we've designed over the years. Wild Asia is now almost 20 years old. So in some ways, it's sort of like we got it started, and now a lot of our attention is looking at not just the next 10 years, but how does this work that we started in Wild Asia, how does this continue for the next 50, 100 years from now?
Yeah, we're 21 years old, so that seems like a long time ago. I guess I wear a few hats. Apart from being a founder, as an ecologist, I'm really interested in how we can make change in the field to the natural systems. I run some of the technical advisory at Wild Asia over the years. I've been involved in HCV programs, and I'm running now really what we're calling the Nature Positive program, which we'll talk a little bit more about in this podcast.
To help our listeners understand a little bit more about regenerative agriculture, John, can you help me in describing in simple terms what it really means?
So it's really a form of agriculture that moves away from chemical dependency and industrialized monoculture towards regeneration of the environment, and principally in an agricultural environment, that is the soil. You know, you can make a lot of changes on a farm, but probably nowhere more so than in the soil itself. So after 100 years of really quite abusive agriculture in this world, we're in a situation now where many of our soils are depleted. They are eroded. We are losing all the nutrients and minerals, and farmers are struggling. They are putting more and more chemicals into the soil. So regenerative agriculture is a way of looking at simple ways and means to build back the soil ecosystem, increase biodiversity in the farm, increase the safety of the environment for the farmer and his or her family, and also looking at the connectivity in a landscape. So how can we reconnect landscapes that have been sort of torn apart by industrialized agriculture?
One of the things that we often hear is that people say, well, if you talk about chemical-free farming, isn't that organic farming? Or find people talking about syntrophic agriculture, or if you look in the past, they had conservation agriculture or agroecology. So there's lots of terms. But I think a big thing for us was, again, this is our the ecologist in us kind of thinking, is that if you look at what all ecosystems need, it is about coming back to the basics of biology. So it's about how these little things that you can't see, the bacteria, the fungi, the hidden microorganisms, and if you look after them, you would have better health outcomes. And this works as humans, this works in any aquatic or terrestrial ecosystems. Just look back 100 years ago and you find, gems of literature and observations. If you look back 1,000 years ago, you find all these good gems of wisdom and traditions, and they were getting it right. It's just, we've forgotten about this.
And something that I always talk to smallholders about when we talk to them about transitioning to bio-friendly, nature-positive farming is don't think of yourself as an oil palm farmer. Now you think of yourself as a fungi and microorganism farmer. Because if you get that right, the palms will be happy. If you get that wrong, the palms will be unhappy.
That's a really good perspective to have, because we don't really necessarily think much about soil health and plant health in general unless it gives profit. But we want to backtrack a little bit because we want to talk a bit more about Wild Asia and how it was founded and how its mission has evolved over the years, leading to the development of WEX Bio, the Regenerative Agriculture Initiative. Is regen agriculture the core principle of Wild Asia? Can you just share a little bit, Reza?
So the name alone, like Wild Asia, already shows you that, we were always focused around biodiversity. And the early work that we did was all around biodiversity assessments. So those HCVs, before we called it HCVs, was a survey of what you had in patches of forest somewhere in the world, forest or whatever habitats they were. So those biodiversity assessments was really our starting point. I think what was also interesting with us was that we took that experience into what was then the early RSPO system. So some of the earliest audits, the Migro criteria being translated into field practices, we were involved. But that's when we opened up our eyes to the social dimensions of agriculture, the best management practices in agriculture, as well as the environmental aspect. So I think the certification experience got us thinking a little bit more holistically. And that was a godsend in a way, because that gave us visibility about trying to look at things from many different perspectives, of the standard, because we read it inside out in different ways. But then taking it to practice. So the first big estates were some of the earliest examples of where we took theory into practice and seeing how it actually can be operationalized. So from the big estates came the next challenge, which is got smallholders next to these mills and they're not certified. And then the question was why? And then came the Wild Asia Group Scheme, which was the solution for how do you group and certify smallholders. So in some ways, those were the foundational pieces. Then from the experience with smallholders, that showed us that policies and nicely worded documents in the office doesn't translate into action. And neither do smallholders really care whether this is principle 2, indicator 4. And I think that's really a big problem with certification today, which is it's all about too many jargons that the reality of the fella on the ground, he doesn't know these things. So Wag's bio was a response to this because, the early, major indicator is chemical use. So how do you train somebody how to have safe use of chemicals? And then how do you make sure your workers and then the farmers and the fellow who you buy the stuff from understands this? And I've got a PhD. So I spent like a year trying to understand what chemical safety means. How do you read labels? I built databases of all of these different things. And in the end, it was impossible to teach. So certification was being affected. So basically, the smallholder certification, it was very hard for them to meet the standards. So it opened up a second dimension, which is then where or how can we have agriculture without chemicals? And that's really the birth of WAG's bio and trying to look at the past experiences, trying to look at historical evidence, and then trying to find recent evidence of these practices and how they can be adopted in a scheme so that people have confidence that they can kind of pick it up.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, Reza, when we founded Wild Asia, one of the core principles, we all came from NGO backgrounds. Yeah, I was with Wetlands International, Reza was with World Wildlife Fund. We had other founders who were from various other NGO backgrounds, and we felt like there was little response from those NGOs often to the major issues of affecting the environment in Malaysia in particular, but in Southeast Asia. One of those was plantations, one of those was forestry, and one of those was tourism. And we really set up Wild Asia with the idea of how do we work within industries to facilitate that change. So I think as Reza's put it, we identify those people who can do that, and it's gone from being the big guys right the way down to the smallholders and the small farmers. And I think one of the taglines that we've been promoting, which I like, is reimagining oil palm in Southeast Asia. So how can we imagine what oil palm could be? We know what it is now, but what's the future? And that's the legacy that we want to leave. Reza and myself and the others want to leave behind. We want to reimagine and change oil palm for the better.
But we did have another tagline, which we realized this year, which was just simply how to make oil palm irresistible. So this idea that, because you've
That's
got
quite
so
sexy,
much,
actually.
you've got so much
That's a sexy tagline.
Well, it's like there's so much negativity. It's like somebody is getting so gung ho, but I want to use organic, da, 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 and then suddenly it's like, oh, but what about your human rights violations? Oh, okay, then we have to fix that. So it's like people have no confidence to see the palm oil that they want. So I think in our case, we're like, well, let's make it happen. And then palm will be completely acceptable. So the other thing with this whole conversation is today we mentioned palm, but in the last 6 months, we've had people come to us and talk about cassava and sugarcane and coconut and rubber. And we have no problems with saying that this is perfectly fine to think about how these ideas will cross over. So actually, it is more about this idea of transforming agriculture. But palm is the best case, especially from a Malaysian perspective, because you've got 5 million hectares of oil palm land already. So imagine making that 5 million hectares irresistible. That's another 50 years work ahead of us.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, we know how to get there.
Okay, I think this is something that I think, Reza, you have touched a little bit. Wax Bio builds upon the foundation of Wild Asia Group Scheme Wax, basically. Can you tell us a bit about how the formation of Wax started? Can you kind of take us through that?
So I think Reza's covered some of it already, but in the global commodities market, it's very easy to see that the small people, the small producers get marginalized, and especially when standards start to come in and certification comes in. So, around 2010, RSPO had already been happening for a couple of years by then. And we were sort of noticing that many of our smallholders were kind of getting left behind. So, WAGS was created to try and address some of these challenges. And how could we get smallholders through a certification process like RSPO or others? Um, so the group scheme was born. So WAG's Wild Asia Group Scheme, and the idea was to group together as many farmers as possible and take them through that process. And that process of certification is often very costly. It's very difficult for single farmers to do it. It's almost impossible, I would say, for a single farmer to bother to do it. So as a group, they can go through and they can do it. And then that opens a door. I see it as opening a doorway. And that once you're certified, that doorway lets you into a whole new world of what's possible in terms of regen ag, in terms of increasing your standards, your good agricultural practices, in terms of how you see your farm, in terms of many things. Yeah. So so that's where I would say WAGs came from. It seems like a long time ago now, 2010, but we've now got over 3,300 members. So those are individual farmers, some with very small farms, some with small growers. We have taken nearly 2,500 of those to a certified status, either MSPO or RSPO, and just touching about 30,000 hectares of certified land. So we're very proud of that. I think our aim is to grow that, but growing it per se is not always easy, and growing it per se is not necessarily the end goal. The end goal is to open that door for more farmers, and then take them on this journey, this nature positive journey, and that's how we're going to get the change we want to see.
One of the takeaways that I get is the way that Wild Asia approach these initiatives also are very integrated and very heavily connected, especially when you mention about the smallholders that got into the initiatives are also Wild Asia staff, right? Like some of them, I think some of the plantation that we went to for the tour in Sabah, I think that is really empowering, and it's really like a really smart way of kind of convincing the smallholder to be part of that initiative.
So one is people think it's convincing, but for me, it was more one to have build a foundation around people who want to live in their community. So actually, it's a bit different for me. For me, it was more like if we can't get someone from that village to be excited about being part of this program, then what's the point?
That's true.
So number two was then this idea that, how do we simplify things so that even a villager can get it?
Looking back at also my experience visiting the wax plantation, one of the things that struck me the most is how much greener wax bio plantation are from the conventional one. And throughout that sharing sessions with different smallholders, they shared about experiencing higher yields on their wax bio plots, and some even tapped into new income streams like growing mushrooms and other complementary crops. Can you share, Reza, about what does it take for a plantation to become a wax bio farm? Can you walk us through the key processes and components that define a wax bio plot?
And I think the main thing is that we worked on practices. So this is about change adoption, so practice adoption. And what we thought of was how do you make things easy to do in the initial stage that you don't have to learn so many things. It's easily accessible, and that it's easy to start with. So we have this on a three stage. I mean, we now call it stage. It's now three stages, but we just added a fourth recently because we got replanting to be thinking about. Um, so the point was that in stage one, it was really about doing nothing, stopping their chemicals, allowing natural regeneration to occur. Number two was then accessing some of these bioproducts if they're accessible, and hence why I said we needed the BTUs to be operational in their area first for them to have access to these biomaterials.
Reza, can you just explain what BTU means?
Biotransformation units. So
Oh,
the units that are producing what we call fermented biojuice, or just the sort of liquid-based fermented products. And then we have two types, which is either with fruit enzymes, fruit-based, vegetable-based, and that produces something else. And then the other one is fish waste, which produces something else. But anyway, so the point is that in that stage one is do nothing, allow that regeneration to happen, add some of these new products which stimulate the soil biology, and not just soil biology, but actually all the bacteria and fungi that lives on the trunks itself, on the leaves, everywhere. And if it's possible to access some mill waste, because sometimes a large injection of organic matter can speed things up, but it's not always necessary. And stage three for us is then adding complexity. So the idea of, do you allow certain areas to regrow, that rewilding in an oil palm block? Can there be intercrops, like cocoa and other crops? Uh, Gingers work really well in the understory because it doesn't need much light. So that's why you see in the trial plots, we worked on gingers because that was the easiest thing to integrate. Um, and there might be other things you can add in terms of building complexity at the farm level.
Yeah, I think to do nothing is one of our sort of taglines of old, but there is a few other things that we do in that stage one. As there's what we call the frond stack modification, where the idea when we looked at different blocks of oil palm, we thought what is the best soil in the whole block, and invariably it's below the frond stack. It's where fronds have been massed and dumped for maybe 5-10 years in cases. So the soil organic matter buildup under those frond stacks is really good. But frond stacks often take a long while to decompose because they are the fronds can be 10, 15 meters long, and they have this arching rib which sticks them off the ground. And when the palm is not in connection with the ground, the decomposition process takes a long time. So just by simply cutting the frond into 3 or 4 pieces, and laying it flatter on the ground and spreading out the frond stacks, you get this process of decomposition happening faster. Then, as Reza said, yeah, some injection of organic matter, whether it's EFBs or mill waste, other mill waste, or compost, or animal waste. It can be anything, yeah? That's an important component. And then what Reza mentioned about the cutting and dropping the ground cover is also critically important, because the more different diversity, higher diversity of plants you have growing in that soil, with living roots functioning in that soil, putting sugars into that soil, feeding the microbiome in that soil, feeding the fungus in that soil, the more life you have, the more the soil is going to be giving back to the palm. So if you spray that with herbicide, you kill the roots. So you're actually contributing quite a lot to the death of the soil. If you simply cut it and allow it to rot, the plant regenerates. 3 or 4 months later, you have to cut again. So the living root is a very important part of the living soil.
Yeah, that's true.
It's really great to see there's a lot of components that is being looked at in terms of regenerative agriculture in these initiatives. But I think it's also important to bring out the numbers. So I want to let the audience know about the benefit. Basically, like I mentioned, how smallholders saying that the yields are a lot higher. Can you share on what are the outcomes that Wild Asia has seen over the years from these initiatives?
I think the overwhelming thing is, although the industry is concerned about yields, managing or tracking yields in a smallholder block is not the same. So I'm going to separate out between smallholders and estates, because actually what we found was the yield question is best addressed in an estate environment compared to the smallholders. So on the ground, like, we're already seeing like first indication. So often people say, oh, my leaves are greener. So this is just observational. So some would say there's more female flowers, and the weight of their fruit bunches has increased. So these are the tangible things that the farmers are seeing for themselves. Often we're then hearing, oh, my yields have gone up from 1 metric ton this month to now 1.5. They are noticing some change. Then and that's at a yield level. On the soil level, we've been tracking a few things: water infiltration, earthworm counts. And they're two very important and quite powerful indicators. The water infiltration is just how alive your soils are. Because if you have no pores in your soil is dead. So actually what people don't realize is most agriculture, industrial land is dead because it's hard. The water is not able to flow. That means there's oxygen not able to get in or carbon dioxide able to get out. So the water infiltration improves. And we know this one empirically because we have the test plots and we've been monitoring over these 3-4 years. The other one, which is also very clear, is earthworm biomass density goes up. And earthworms are your great bioengineers. So the more you have them, the more stuff is going on in the soil, the more of that soil becomes food for your plants. So we know that that's definitely a good sign. And visually, you can see it on the forest, on the farm floor, because you see all these worm castings everywhere. So that's at the soil level. We went a little bit crazy. So then we did a life cycle assessment, and we have remote sensing monitoring of these farms. So the idea being that we now have another set of data, which is actually looking at the farm emissions themselves. So just calculated, a WAGS bio farm can reduce your farm emissions by as much as 60 to 70%. And the remote sensing work, which looks at net ecosystem exchange, so it's just a measure of how much a unit of area is sequestering against how much it's emitting. So it's emissions minus sequestration. And then we're seeing positive results. So actually these little bioplots are increasing its sequestration. That means that net ecosystem exchange gets better. And in some cases, they're in the negatives, which is it's actually at a point where it's a net carbon sink, which is what you want to get to. So all in all, these are the results from the smallholder blocks. And we've used them to start talking to some of the estates. And we had some of the early trials, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. But what's overwhelmingly clear is you're getting somewhere between 10 to 31% yield improvements. So I love this idea that it's the smallholders who's driving this change.
We learnt so much from our early adopter smallholders, and there's one particular gentleman in Perak called Mr. Neo, who he was one of our early influences. We learned from him various things that we've now trialed on a big scale. That he was just a Chinese farmer in a small town, talking to his friends in the coffee shop, talking about different things they could try, and they were trying these things out and doing it very quietly. And we are very happy to come along and learn from him and see what he's doing. And then now, as Reza said, some of that work is now being done in the bigger estates. So it's good to see that sort of traveling upwards in the system. Yeah. So in the early days, we were also just exploring different options, but learning from these smallholders too. which I think is a really important message to get across.
By putting ourselves out there, we find these gems. So there's not just the neo. There's a Bidin, an indigenous Orang Asli fella sitting in Carey Island. There is Muharram sitting in another village somewhere on the other side. Now the Muharram, we have one remark he made was like, I now feel the burden, not of life, but it was like the burden of farming has been lifted, and that I enjoy now jogging in the back of my farm, and my children can play in the farm. I have no problems because I have no chemicals anymore. And it's just filled with, I mean, he's the one that he's got an infestation of earthworms because it's literally everywhere. And if you've ever visited this farm, it is amazing. But he was my bio farmer number one because we ran that workshop in the village, and he was the first guy to say, okay, well, let's just try it. And then he just kept on doing it. The challenge now is like, especially you mentioned the intercrop. So now that we've taught people mushrooms, gingers, these other crops, I need help to find buyers for them. Because if he's planted it, it would be great if I can just say, okay, look, whatever you plant, I'll buy. And that's extra income for the fella. And so that if there's a listener out there, I think my missing piece now is off-takers for some of these smaller products and getting that to market. And so we've got like Sabah gingers. And number two is that we have Sabah gingers growing under oil palm. They look smaller and scragglier, but the taste is great. And the ladies in, I think it was Tongaat area, they love this because they realized that ginger prices have gone crazy. And so for them, it was like just a local product that they could sell amongst the various families was already an income source.
Pulling you back to the RSPO certification conversation, how does Wild Asia envision integrating these components into the RSPO certification system, and what would that look like to you?
Yeah, so actually there's not much change you need to have here, because actually there's already criterias around soil health and what have you. It's just practice. Like, how do you show this practice can work? So I think we need to have this network building up so that we have more practice adoption in the future. I'm talking like 10 years down the road. Maybe we can think about enhancing an indicator or two. But I think the biggest challenge now is just getting enough practice adoption.
John, anything you want to add on?
Yeah, I don't think so in that regard. I think something that we've been sort of looking at. I've always had, as an ecologist, I always have this kind of bit of a grumble about RSPO buffer zones, along water courses. And I've for 20 years now, I'm visiting many estates around Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and they're all RSPO certified, and I don't really see any kind of tangible buffer zone along a water course. It's always planted right to the edge, and there's a little sign saying RSPO buffer zone, and it'll be 5, 10, 15 meters wide, no spraying, but otherwise it looks exactly the same as the rest of the estate. So one of the things we've been toying with is an idea of, yes, you can maintain that as your buffer, but then you have the field block behind it as a bio nature positive block, where you remove chemical use, you start some of these phase 1, 2, 3 options we've just talked about, and so you really have a protective buffer for that water course, because so much of what happens in especially a statewide oil palm industry is, it ends up in that river, it ends up in that stream, and it ends up in the big river, and it ends up in the sea. So I think that's one thing that I think we could look at in more detail as to how RSPO can, the certification system could adopt some of these principles of biological farming or nature positive farming.
Okay, we are moving to the final, last but not least question for this episode. So, looking ahead, what role do you see regenerative agriculture play in the future of sustainable palm oil? And as you say also previously, it's not just about palm oil; it's also agriculture in broader terms. What is needed for businesses and policymakers and even consumers to make this a shift, to make this shift a reality?
Where I come from in Wales, it's largely an agricultural farming community. Yeah, my sister is a farmer, sheep farmer, and farmers are seen as the sort of guardians of the countryside, the guardians of nature. They are given the opportunity to grow products, whatever that may be, but also to look after the environment. Now, in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, that is not the case. We do not look at our farmers as guardians. We do not look at our plantation companies, the big estates, as guardians. Now, I would like to see that change happen where, we've got big estates, big government-linked companies in Malaysia especially, who are looking after huge percentages of our countryside. So when people come out of the city into the countryside in Malaysia, they're in oil palm and everyone thinks it's just, a dead environment. But actually, this could be a really interesting sort of future environment for our children and our grandchildren. It could be something, if you get this change, that the big companies especially go above and beyond RSPO. RSPO, MSPO is just there for them to achieve, but we're now working with one or two estates, small estates, where for the first time ever I heard one of the board members, sort of say, we want to do X, Y, and Z because it's the right thing to do. I'd never heard that before in 25 years of working in oil palm in Malaysia. So these are small changes, but the idea that we can create more guardians, we can create more biodiversity, more habitat, more connectivity in the landscape, I think are all important things we need to push for.
If we want to think about what sustainability can bring, especially in a commodity, I think we've got to see it differently because palm, we have to expect or accept that it is a commodity product. It's just about 100 years old, but we have used this as an industrial product. So hence the custodian of land, like John's saying, it was never there. But the model of agriculture dates back some 10,000 years ago. If you think about the Fertile Crescent, now our modern agriculture is based around these ideas. And the Fertile Crescent today is dead. It's no longer fertile. So if the industrial agriculture model of oil palm is built around an outdated, a defunct model, we have to accept that, what is this other way of doing things? And that's why I think, look beyond all of that and look to traditional practices in the Amazons and whatever. There's different ways. And then we know now with biology, there is a different way. We understand how plants are in a symbiosis with bacteria and fungi, which we didn't know 10 years ago because of just the way that we can now see this change happening. So that's a big mindset shift. Now, as a commodity, we need to think about how do we use the current relationship between the brands, the buyers, and stuff. So that's why I feel that certification schemes are great to work with because that whole chain is already there. All we're influencing is the outcome, which no one sees. And now I can tell you how many earthworms are growing, and that tells you that that farm that's connected to you is improving. So the more practice, the more impact outcome related level of stuff that you bring to the table. This is going to supercharge any supply chain. We have to think that actually a lot of these movements is about people, and that's the center of this change, not certification systems on its own.
The main theme that I get from our overall conversation is about partnership and connectivity. And it kind of reflects to RSPO's global vision to make palm oil sustainable. And I think that wraps up the episode on regenerative agriculture today. And I would like to give a big thank you to Reza and John for spending your time. It has been a really insightful conversation. So thank you so much, Reza and John, for coming to the Palm Pod.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Farah.
much for having us.
Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the Palm Pod on your favorite podcasting platforms. Feel free to share your feedback for our next episode. I was speaking to our guests, Reza, Azmi, and John House from Wild Asia. I'm Fara Rom, and this is the Palm Pod.